and I'm going to switch gears now. So we've talked a lot about the land, and now if Jim and Brooke would put your video and microphones on, I'm going to switch to thinking about animals out on the land, animals and management of animals. So we've got two great folks here. Again, we have someone that does a lot of science and extension work with producers, and that's Jim Sprinkle. So Jim, if your camera is on, that would be great.
I can't do it because the host has disabled it.
Oh, Eric, let him in. We'll see if we can. We'll see if we can able you. Okay, there we go. You are able. Okay, so Jim is going to give us some more information, but the one who's going to host him and ask him the tough questions is Brooke Swanke. And Brooke is, I'm so happy to say, a Vandal. She graduated from the University of Idaho, originally from Montana and a few other places. And Brooke is the Range Management Director at the Idaho State Department of Agriculture. So she's worked on both sides. She knows ranchers, she's worked with ranchers, and now she's working for ISDA and helping ranchers kind of think about how they would monitor and manage into the future. So Brooke, welcome, and I'm going to let you take over and try to work with Jim to find out some answers here. So go ahead, Brooke.
Great. Well, thank you, Karen, for the introduction, and awesome questions, great discussion, so fun to be a part of. As Karen said, my name is Brooke Swanke, and I have the pleasure of hosting Dr. Jim Sprinkle this afternoon. So Dr. Sprinkle is an extension beef specialist at the Nancy M. Cummings Research, Extension, and Education Center, where he's worked for 5 years since moving to Salmon, Idaho from Arizona. So what we get to challenge our audience with and kind of challenge our own brains with today is now that we know that things are changing and we have some lessons from the past, how do we adapt to fit the future? So I guess just to get things started off, Dr. Sprinkle, so lots of research has been done to track and predict the altered climate regime in the Pacific Northwest. So what changes can we expect?
Well, I've got a pretty nice fact sheet that I got off of the Rangeland Center site, and I recommend people look at that. And I just put out the key points of that, and so I think all of you are pretty much in agreement with what I'm going to say, is that there is predicted to be less snow in the winter, less summer precip, and greater summer temperatures. And so if we're talking about livestock production, that's going to reduce forage quality from July through September. And also accompanying that, we're going to have greater heat load of the cattle that are in those hot temperatures in the summertime. And I just want to show you one slide here from research done a long time ago. This was at a little higher elevation, but I think it's we can still extrapolate some of it to Idaho. And what you can see here is that for perennial grasses, we're dropping below the nutrient requirements for a non-lactating cow about the end of August. Now, the requirements for a lactating animal are going to be greater, and this doesn't say that they necessarily are not going to meet their requirements. If they have plenty of selection and choice, if their pastures are being rotated frequently, then that's going to change. But the main thing I want to say here is that with the impending climate changes, we can expect this nutrient deficiency to shift back probably by about a month. So about the end of July, as we proceed onward, we could expect to be approaching nutrient deficits.
So in the context of where are we now, how does the average cow herd fit this situation if we're looking at changes in available forage?
So it took me about 2 or 3 hours to make this slide here, but I went back and got the slaughter weights of beef cattle for the last 29 years, and then I converted it to a live weight. And so just going off of that basis, we've increased cow size about 200 pounds since around 1990. And this slide here is some great research that's been summarized by Montana State. And this was work that Dr. Kress was involved in. And so if we look at where the cow herd was nationally about that time, let me set this up. On the left here, we've got cow size. On the right, we've got milk production. And then in the triangle here, we've got precipitation. So the cow herd back about 1990 pretty easily fit a range type environment. We had medium milk production and we had medium size on the cow herd. So we were easily fitting within that 12 to 15 inch rainfall zone. So where we are now is shown up here. We're about a 1,400 pound cow. We got greater milk production. And so we're right on the edge of falling off the cliff as we require more and more resources to support that type of production, more rainfall. And if we can't provide that in the natural environment, we're going to have to provide it with added inputs, more winter feed, more supplemental feed, and we've got greater risk and greater cost associated with that. So let me just show you this slide. This is some research from North Dakota over their cow herds. And from 1995 to 2017, cow weight increased about 100 pounds, pretty much like it has in the US. And the average weight of calf wean per cow exposed increased 9 pounds. And so the average is for range is about 6 to 10 pounds, say. So we've increased calf weaning weights about 10 pounds at a cost of 100 pounds of cow weight. So we can figure about $15 advantage for the weaning weights, but the research has shown an extra 100 pounds costs us $42 on the cow side. So that's really not a wise investment, but this is what we've been doing as we've chased increasing weaning weights. And of course, as you all know, as we get bigger cows, we have less that we can put out on the same amount of rangeland.
Those are some pretty great statistics, Dr. Sprinkle. Just, yeah, hearing $15 to make 10 pounds versus, you know, just over 40, really interesting. So that the high milk production, heavier weaning weights, what are we really seeing, or what can we expect on rangelands with a high milk production cow? How do they use the range?
So let's take a cow that fits a range environment pretty good for milk production. Let's say that she's got a milk EPD of 12 pounds. And we use an average bull from, say, like an Angus average is around 25 pounds. And if that's the case, then we can expect to add around 13 pounds to the offspring of those two animals. And so what that would do is for peak milk production, we'd increase that about 3.6 pounds for those replacement heifers. And so what would be required would be if we take an average production of around 650 pounds per acre, that would require that cow to graze an extra 68 minutes a day at the time of peak milk production. And so there's a point where if cows continue to have increased requirements to harvest forage, they're just not going to do it after they get to fatigue. And so that's usually about 12 or 13 hours a day. So I took some cows and kind of modeled them mathematically. And so here we have on the bottom this purple line. This is a cow that would be approaching that Angus average. She weans a 600-pound calf. She has 24 pounds peak milk production. And this is a range environment. So let's say we fed them January and February not to lose any weight. We continued feeding them through March, but they lose weight as they enter lactation. And then we're thinking about moving them out to rangeland April, May-ish, somewhere in there. So the cow with the greatest milk production, we could expect her to breed back when she starts gaining weight back in June. And if we're trying to produce a calf in February, we're going to extend that calving interval to 13 months. So with that type of cow, we could expect her to miss a month one year and then miss a month the next year. So we're going to continually increase that calving interval and ultimately reduce our fertility conception.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I mean, again, those are keeping your cattle all bred up at the same time and calving at the same time is huge. So with all of these challenges, and we have the challenge of climates changing, we have a cow herd that may or may not fit the range. What is the University of Idaho doing to help producers answer these questions?
So we've been doing a series of studies since about 2015, and we have a bunch of people that have helped us with that research. I won't read all their names, but I'm flashing them here on the screen for you to see. And so in our beef focus surveys with the beef production pod in 2015, throughout Idaho, we were requested to conduct some research into cow efficiency. And at the Nancy M. Cummings Research Extension Education Center, we've got some specialized equipment, growth safe units, and we can get, in a feedlot situation, we can determine how much an animal is eating every day. And these cows have a RFID tag. It weighs how much they eat each day. And we can compare them for efficiency, compared to what they should eat based on their weight and their performance. Are they efficient? Are they inefficient? Are they average? But what we want to know is that if cows that are ranked efficiently here as yearling heifers, are they also efficient in a rangeland setting? And so that's kind of what we've been trying to address.
What have been some of the major outcomes of that research? I mean, I think that's, each producer definitely wants to make sure that the animal that's converting that forage to protein is an efficient animal. So how are these animals using the ground in different ways?
So let's talk first about wintertime, and this is our research up at Du Bois. And this first slide is just showing all cows. It's not breaking them out, efficient or inefficient. And cows are very adaptable. So this blue line shows cow behavior in a colder year. This was the year we got all the snow in 2016 through the 2017. And then this line here in the brown is a more normal or drier year. So in the wet, colder year, the cows grazed more during the cold times, early morning, late afternoon, or late evening. And they were doing that to help keep warm. They were moving around, and while they were moving around, they were harvesting forage. And when the temperatures got, when they were in the middle part of the day, they spent more time resting. And what they were doing then is they were standing broadside to the sun trying to warm up. Now, this was a year prior to that, that 2-year study, and we looked at 2-year-old cows that didn't get any supplement for 75 days. And that's not what we recommend, but we were trying to see what happened. And so the cows that were efficient, 2-year-old cows, they lost about 1.4 pounds a day. The cows that were inefficient lost 1.9 pounds per day. So then we wanted to see, well, how do these efficient versus inefficient cows behave when they're lactating and when it's hotter? And so I'm going to show you just a few slides here. This is a pasture on Rock Creek. It's got some slope to it, as you can see. And first, let me explain a little bit about heat load. A cow goes into mild heat load when in Idaho when the temperatures get about 79 or 80 degrees. And so in late summer of 2016, we had cows in a mild heat load for 4 to 6 hours a day. And we're going to compare that to cows in the spring of 2017, which really didn't have any times when they were in mild heat load. So first off, let's look at those efficient versus inefficient cows for grazing time. When the temperatures were mild in 2017, those inefficient cows grazed 1.7 hours longer per day than did the efficient cows. Greater appetite, they're going to graze more and try to harvest it. And what they did is they started grazing earlier in the morning and they grazed longer in the morning time period. They quit later during the morning. So this is when the temperatures were mild. We only had 2 hours total in this 6-day period that they were in a mild heat load. But let's look at the cows in 2016 in August, and they had 35 hours in mild heat load. And what it really happened is those inefficient cows spend a lot more time resting in the mid-afternoon time period. And so you can see there was a difference between the efficient and inefficient cows. Those inefficient cows spent more time resting and trying to shade up. And the reason they do that is if you got a bigger appetite, you got a bigger gut to go with it, bigger liver, bigger rumen, etc. And so that generates heat, just like a big engine in a vehicle generates more heat. And this is further verified by our GPS data. So these are only 2 cows, but they're representative of the groups. And these are all the GPS locations for all the hot days in August when they were in heat load. And the cow in green, the efficient cow, she spent a lot more time up on the slopes, climbing the slopes, harvesting forage. The cow in pink, the inefficient cow, spent more time down by the shade and the water.
Yeah, I mean, the proof is on the land, you know, and as most range managers know, your issues are typically down along those riparian areas where you want to be grazing those slopes. So my family, as Karen mentioned, you know, I grew up ranching, and my family is actually moving toward more efficient cattle production in their rangeland setting. How could they start making changes to their herd to meet this efficiency goal?
Well, I think 2 of the first things we should work on is reducing milk production, reducing cow size, and trying to get those cows back where they ought to be. So this is from the American Angus Association, and this is milk EPDs. And so to fit a rangeland operation, milk EPD should probably be around 10 to 15 pounds. And the breed average is 25 pounds, and that's what direction we've been going for quite a few years as we increase weaning weights. To fit a range environment, we have to, in the Angus breed, we'd have to find a bull in about the bottom 5% of the breed for that particular trait. And so you can find those bulls, but it requires a little more effort. The advantage of it is probably you're going to get those bulls cheaper, probably $500 to $700 cheaper than you would a bull with the other characteristics. And if you combine that with frame score, then, you know, that's another thing to look at. So if we look at a cow that was kind of like what we had in 1990, she'd be a frame score about a 5, maybe a 6. And so that would have her weight be around 1,175 to 1,250 pounds at a body condition score of 5. So how can we move that direction? Well, we can do some selection on frame score on those replacement heifers when we wean them. So I just took the Beef Improvement Federation chart and I just highlighted here that to fit that range, she needs to be between 43 and 45 inches at the hip. And so we can do some selection on that and we can start to make some adjustments over time. Another thing that we can consider is to look at that feed efficiency, residual feed intake, high efficiency bulls. And so some would be concerned, well, what's that going to do to my weaning weight? Well, just to show you here, we've got wean weights for those cows that I showed you some data on. Here's the weaning weights in 2016. There was no difference here between those weaning weights, between the efficient and inefficient cows. There was no difference in 2017. There's no difference in the milk production. There's no difference in the cow weight. There was no difference in body condition. So Derek Bailey from New Mexico State has been looking at gene markers for hill climbing cattle, and they've found those, and they can actually do some selection on that. It's our hope that we can also find markers for the efficient versus inefficient cows, because we think that based on the data we've seen that it's very related to the hill climbing cows, that the efficient cows are probably related to what Derek's been seeing.
That future would be really exciting to be able to pick out those genes. I want to remind the audience that the question and answer option, the chat box down there for questions is open. So if you have any questions for us, I have a few more, but just want to encourage your participation in that too. So we have a climate change. We're trying to breed towards some hill climbing, more efficient, smaller frame livestock potentially. So how can tools such as supplementing change livestock behavior in seasons where forage might not meet nutritional needs?
Yeah, so I want to mention on this slide right here that Dr. Brenda Murdoch is the one that's looking at those markers from our cattle. But let's just quickly go through how behavior changes with supplementation. And this was a study done at Du Bois. Again, we had all these people helping out. And we had cows we supplemented or didn't supplement it. And we either rotated pastures with them or we didn't. And what we seen was, just looking at weight, we lost weight on the cows that stayed in the same pasture, didn't get any supplement over that time period. We gained weight with the supplemented cows. We also gained some weight with the cows that were rotated because they were able to do a little diet selection. And what I just want to point out here is if we just look at the continuously grazed pastures, the cows that were supplemented, they rested an hour more per day and they walked about an hour less. And we saw the same thing with the efficient versus inefficient cows in 2017. The efficient cows rested more and walked less than did the inefficient cows. So what's going on here? Well, what's going on is that these inefficient cows and these cows that aren't supplemented, they're spending more time looking for a quality diet. They're doing more search grazing. And when we looked at the bite rate for those supplemented versus non-supplemented cows, the cows that were supplemented harvested forage slower than did the supplemented cows. So what are they doing? Well, they're going to a grazing site and they're taking 1 or 2 bites and then they're moving on to another spot because they're looking for green. And as opposed to the supplemented cattle, they're content to stay in the one spot and harvest more bites there. And so this may not seem like much of a difference, but when you look at it over a day's time, and we gain about 1/3 pound more per day with those supplemented cows. So we really do change their behavior.
So yeah. Oh,
go ahead.
So I think, I mean, the question we had actually for the audience is if there's anybody out there that is making management changes personally, and if you want to just put those changes you're making to your herd in the box, we'll share some of those from the question and answer box. I did have a question from the audience, Dr. Sprinkle, about some breed changes. Are there breeds that are more suited or already have those smaller frames?
Well, yeah, I'll get in trouble for this, but I'll say it anyway. So I think the Red Angus Association has been taking some efforts to try and reduce the cow herd. But if you look at the average cow size over most of the breeds in the U.S., they've all been increasing in cow weight. And it used to be there was a big difference between a Charolais cow and a Hereford cow and an Angus cow, but now they're pretty similar. And so I think we, you know, if we're thinking about breeds, we probably should, more than that, just think about people within the breeders, seed stock producers that are trying to produce range type bulls.
Yeah, thanks for that. I love this slide that you have up here because it's really where the rubber meets the road. Is kind of like April was talking about with setting objectives for rangelands and restoration. The question for any operator with their management of their livestock is, what are their goals and what are they willing to do, and what is the cost benefit analysis to that? So I think, you know, just talking about the costs, I think there's definitely a cost to change. You know, there's intense labor that sometimes can come along with putting out supplement, or, you know, changing your grazing rotation to make sure you have forage in those times of year that there might be a lesser quality. But what do you think, Dr. Sprinkle, are some of the social costs or other costs that we might not commonly think about, or maybe we think about first off even?
Well, yeah, so like Kit Fayroe puts it, you lose bragging rights if you're trying to go more toward moderation. And, you know, some of your neighbors may think you've been smoking wacky-backy. So there's that, but there's also, you know, some changes, like you mentioned, labor, and that probably you should be looking at increased record keeping. Because if you do that, you can do more selection. You know what each cow's doing, you know how she's performing in your environment, and you can select and do some things. And one other point I want to make is we pointed out that the cows need to adapt. We need to adapt also, just like the cows need to adapt. And I think our regulations need to adapt to accommodate some of these changes. You know, like somebody mentioned yesterday, we might need to go out earlier to graze during the year if we're shifting our plant phenology backwards by a month.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so we've talked a little bit about the cost, but I mean, some benefits may be that higher body condition score at the end of the grazing year, where you don't have to put as much input into feed that winter to get back to a good condition for the next, you know, season of lactating and breeding again. So I think there was a question too in the chat box about grazing strategies. I think there has been a move lately toward more of, I think somebody mentioned yesterday too, like mob grazing, or just simply more higher density, lower frequency grazing. So more livestock on a smaller piece of ground for a shorter amount of time, and then allowing that piece of ground to rest, and, you know, maybe even have, you know, 1.5 or 2 years before it's visited again. I think we're running a little lower on time, but I think, yeah, another question, it was just what has driven this tendency we've seen for larger, heavier cattle? And I think it is that the search for ever higher weaning weights, I think, is probably the simplest answer to that one.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, I agree with you there.
Well, I'm going to start to bring this to conclusion, but wow, Jim, that was great. That was some really good information. And Brooke, you did a great job on questions. I think when you get a chance to look at that question box, Jim, Dr. Sprinkle, there were some questions that even had well, what about bison? Or what about these Criollo breeds? Or really trying to think on the outside. So I'm impressed with those of you who are asking questions that you're really trying to think broadly. And Jim, maybe you can get a chance to answer some of those questions also while you're on. So I have to say that I feel like we should have gotten college credit for that. That was really great. And yet you explained it really simply. So thank you. And even for those of you who aren't livestock producers out there, this is how you figure out, what's really happening on the ground. So thanks for that. I'm going to share my screen and give you two pieces or two ideas for information. Jim, you already mentioned this the resources. You should be able to see the Rangeland Center webpage right here. And if you go to resources on the webpage, you'll be able to find that new climate fact sheet that just got completed. Eric Winford took a big role on that, and here's that fact sheet right here, if it shows. Took a big role on that along with Vincent Janssen, who's one of our postdocs. And they created a really good fact sheet about what is going to happen in Idaho's rangelands. I don't know why it's not moving for me, but anyway, go to the Rangeland Center resources page, click on the fact sheet, and you'll see what we know about how climate has changed in the Pacific Northwest and how that is affecting rangelands. The other thing I was going to point out, you mentioned Derek Bailey, who's done some work on inheritance of livestock using the range. And if you go to Art of Range podcast, oh, there's the fact sheet. Now it's showing up for me. So hopefully you'll get a chance to look at it. It's really good information, and the questions were from producers and people on our advisory board that asked those questions. So I hope you get a chance to take a look at that. It's just hot off the press. We just got it out in August of this year. And it's one of our frequent series on fact sheets. I'm going to stop my screen now and tell you that if you are interested in that work that Derek Bailey and others are doing, there's the Art of Range podcast. If you haven't been listening to that, that's a pretty darn good podcast. And there was a recent one that featured Derek and what he knows about inheritance of selection. So thanks again.